Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 936, Sword Cry. Han Li gave a respectful nod to Cao Mangrong's senior martial sister, but when he heard of the man's unordinary status, his expression stirred and he said, "The South Pillar General. So you were one of the 8 illustrious generals of the Great Jin. I've been too rude." Although he understood very little of the Great Jin's court, he was well aware of its famous officials. The 8 great generals controlled a majority of the military strength in the empire. Each of them commanded armies numbering in the millions, protecting the cities at the frontier with hardened elites. However, the reason why Han Li knew about these generals wasn't because of any concern for the mortal world, but that 3 of the great generals were relatives of the royal family. As for the rest, they were given assistance from the various superpowers of the cultivation world to acquire their positions. Even the great Jin imperial family couldn't easily go against them. And since the South Pillar General wasn't related to the royal family, it was certain he had a relationship to one of these factions. The general smiled and cupped his hand towards Han Li. "I have heard from Mangrong that Sir Han is a cultivator. As I am but a mere mortal, how could I dare to act superior in front of you?" Of course, Han Li knew he was only being polite. With his identity, he wouldn't find it difficult to attract the service of core formation cultivators but not nascent soul cultivators. Han Li previously revealed to Cao Mangrong that he was only at Qi condensation stage, but this person was quite unordinary to treat a minor cultivator like Han Li with such courtesy. And it was also quite brave of him to make his way to the capital without a high-grade cultivator protecting him. With that in mind, Han Li modestly replied, "I don't dare to be presumptuous. General Wang is being far too polite. Even vagrant cultivators like me have long heard of your military prowess." Young Miss Wang pursed her lips in a smile and said, "Fellow Daoist Han, I've heard you've given junior martial sister Cao cultivation guidance for a time." As a result, she managed to raise 2 layers in a few short years. When my master found this out, she repeatedly praised junior martial sister Cao's luck and suggested that Brother Han had likely concealed his true cultivation, as ordinary cultivators absolutely wouldn't be able to produce such inconceivable results. Now that fellow Daoist Han's body is lacking spiritual qi, it clearly shows that you've mastered a qi restraining technique. It appears that my master had guessed correctly. Absorbed in the joy of seeing Han Li again, Cao Mangrong then woke up and examined him to find that his body completely lacked any spiritual qi fluctuations. With an astonished expression, she yelped, "So it was like that? Brother Han, your cultivation must be," he smiled and calmly replied. "At the time, I had encountered mishap and received heavy injuries, greatly harming my cultivation as well. I've managed to now restore it to some degree, but I hadn't intended on hiding this from fellow Daoist Cao." It was clear he had no intention of revealing his true cultivation. Young Miss Wang blinked and she carefully examined Han Li. As a result, she wasn't able to sense anything from Han Li's body. Despite her amazement, she sweetly smiled and said, "In that case, it would be more appropriate to call fellow Daoist Han a senior. I hope senior won't take offense at how junior martial sister Cao treated you like an equal in the past." "Me, a senior?" Han Li shook his head. "I am only a vagrant cultivator in the Great Jin and I don't care for titles. As I am indebted to fellow Daoist Cao, it is fine for her to treat me as an equal." When Cao Mangrong heard this, her expression wavered and then she blushed as she silently accepted Han Li's words. The general heard their exchange and then calmly proposed, "So it turned out that Sir Han was actually an expert with profound magic power. Although I am only a mortal, I do enjoy associating with cultivators. Since it seems you wish to also head to the capital, would you like to head there together?" Han Li pondered for a moment before saying, "Travel together? I accept. Sorry for bothering you." He was just thinking about finding someone familiar with the Jin capital and have them tell him about the trade meet. Now that this illustrious figure has appeared before him, he should know quite a few details despite being a mortal. Afterwards, Han Li and the two women had a quick conversation, and he found out that Cao Mengrong's father had successfully promoted from a mere county officer to a military official in the capital. Although his position wasn't higher in name, being transferred there from the outskirts of the empire was a significant rise in status. But when her father moved to the capital, she was cultivating in sealed seclusion and hadn't traveled together with him. When her senior martial sister Wang and her uncle traveled past her residence, Cao Mengrong happened to emerge from seclusion, and soon after, she was traveling with them to the capital. As for Han Li, he only mentioned a few passing words about how he spent the past, mentioning that he was recuperating from his injuries and had only recently emerged from seclusion. Of course, he hadn't gone into detail. The two cultivators didn't ask for any further details. After all, Han Li was originally found sealed in ice, and his injuries at the time were clearly heavy. They didn't appear to be something that could be healed in a few years' time. At that moment, a waiter from the tea shop brought over a pot of fine tea, and the three cultivators chatted for a moment before drinking it. With the tea finished, General Wang finally began to talk to Han Li and mentioned a few hidden ancient records that were stored in a few of his estates. He currently didn't appear to be a hardened veteran at all, but more like a studious scholar. His calm and cultured demeanor, along with his friendly words, gave Han Li a very favorable impression of him. He also managed to impress General Wang in turn. Although he couldn't say that he was interested in ancient histories, he discovered many secrets as he searched through many ancient records for pill formulas and secret techniques, and he was able to closely capture the general's interest when he mentioned them. After a few short words, they were absorbed in their conversation with another, completely tuning out the other two. When young Miss Wang saw this, she wryly smiled at Cao Mengrong, but she was feeling somewhat gloomy. She was well aware of her uncle's interest in the secrets of the far past, as he was often immersed in collecting ancient records and antiques during his spare time. Now that the knowledgeable senior Han had come along, it was only natural for her uncle to be absorbed in conversation with him. Cao Mengrong didn't have any complaints about this. She simply quietly sat at the side and listened to them talk. When her gaze occasionally swept past Han Li's face, she would quickly turn her eyes away as if trying to hide her actions. Young Miss Wang saw this with bright eyes and found her actions to be quite funny. When she spoke with her junior martial sister Cao on the way, she faintly realized that her junior martial sister had a feeling of affection for the person in front of her. Whenever she mentioned this person, she would faintly blush as if he was often on her mind. This gave young Miss Wang the impression that fellow Daoist Han was a handsome and confident youth, as her junior martial sister wouldn't treat her martial brothers with any particular emotion. But now that she saw Han Li in person, she couldn't help but shake her head. This vagrant cultivator was neither the handsome or confident youth that she had imagined. The only redeeming factor of his appearance was his taller than average height. Additionally, he was most likely a foundation establishment cultivator and should have a far greater lifespan than her junior martial sister, who had little hope of cultivating past qi condensation stage. They truly weren't a good match. As young Miss Wang secretly thought this, she began to consider whether or not she should do anything to sabotage this potential relationship. From her point of view, Han Li's cultivation was only slightly high. As the niece of the South Pillar General, it wouldn't be too difficult for her to have Han Li change his mind. If he truly refused, she could simply make a request to the two core formation cultivators in her estate's hire and have him obediently go away. So it was like that. In the past, heaven and earth and yin and yang were undergoing vast changes and created unstable spatial tiers, allowing demons and devils to entering our world from others. This is the first time I've heard of such a theory. The two core formation cultivators under my estate have never mentioned this to me. Brother Han is truly knowledgeable and has expanded my perspective. However, there is still something I don't understand. Ancient legends spoke of an immortal mountain by the name Kunwu, where a celestial immortal resided. It is said, General Wang still spoke with excitement. After Han Li answered a question, General Wang was about to ask another when a dragon's cry sounded out from Han Li's body. Although it wasn't very loud, everyone in the room could clearly hear it, and they turned to look at him in surprise. Han Li's expression vastly changed and his body flickered with blue light before disappearing out of sight. The two women quickly looked around in surprise and discovered that Han Li had appeared outside, much to their shock. He was looking towards the sky with a grave expression. Has something happened, fellow Daoist Han? Could it be you have a magic treasure in your body? Are you a core formation cultivator? Young Miss Wang asked with an astonished expression. As for Cao Mangrong, she was firmly grabbing into a scarf and her complexion paled as she silently looked at him. Han Li quickly regained his calm and then turned to the other three. It's nothing, I merely sensed an old friend of mine fly past us. Unfortunately, he flew by too quickly and I can no longer chase him. I'm afraid I've made a fool of myself in front of you. And yes, the sound was indeed caused by a flying sword I keep in my body. As my circumstances have changed, I can no longer travel together with you since I have urgent business to attend to. I will be taking my leave. He saluted them and spoke with a regretful tone. Then without another word, he stomped down on his foot and launched himself into the air as a streak of azure light. When the other tea shop patrons nearby saw what had happened, they quickly knelt down on the ground in the panic and began to loudly shout. An immortal! A great immortal had flown past us. They had flown near us. For a time, an uproar spread throughout the tea shops nearby. Chapter 937. Scoundrels. After the time it took to finish a meal, Han Li arrived on top of a small mountain. He looked at the huge city in the distance and saw carriages and pedestrians busily making their way through the gate. As Han Li continued to watch with a gloomy expression, Monarch Soul Divergence's voice sounded from in his mind. Leave it be, you've already gained something now that you know the Elder Devil is in the Great Jin. You will eventually have a chance to reclaim your flying swords, but now is not the time. You still haven't fully recovered your cultivation and the Tri-Flame fan still hasn't been refined. The Elder Devil may have been inflicted with grave wounds in the past, but it should have been able to also make a full recovery by absorbing the souls and cores of others. If you were to face it now, your odds of victory aren't very high. Xianxia is right. If I were to chase it now, I only have a 1 in 10 chance of defeating the Elder Devil. It is truly too powerful. Previously, I was a bit too hasty since I wanted to retrieve my swords so that I would regain the ability to use the Aureate sword formation. It seems I'll have to wait until you complete your puppet body and after I refine the Tri-Flame fan. However, the devil appeared to have urgent business at hand since he was flying at such a great speed that he hadn't discovered me. As for the 2 bamboo cloudswarm swords in his possession, he wasn't able to subject them to his control and is reluctant to let them go despite this. Since the primary material of their creation is myriad-year golden lightning bamboo and they were tempered with both refined crystal and auric essence, the 2 swords are incredibly valuable magic treasures. If he wished to destroy the swords, he would need to waste a great amount of strength and slowly destroy it with devil flame. There is no way the devil would do something wasteful and fruitless. Finished speaking, Han Li faintly smiled. That's also correct. But with that said, if you were to wholeheartedly hone your flying swords for another 400 years, the power of your sword formation would reach a fearsome stage. It may reach a level of power no lesser than a divine spirit treasure. Monarch Soul Divergence sighed and spoke with a tone of admiration. During his peak, he never had the opportunity to create a magic treasure using such precious materials. Han Li wryly chuckled and said, "Perhaps, but I have no intention of spending nearly half of my lifespan to honing my magic treasures." He, your shrewdness is comparable to mine. If I were half as careful as you were in the past, I might have been able to enter deity transformation stage. As for the reason the Elder Devil appeared in the Jin capital, it most likely has to do with the trade meet. Youngster Han, you must be careful to avoid having the devil recognize you. Many thanks for your concern, Xianxia. I will be careful. I originally planned on drawing on the support of the South Pillar General's estate to understand the particulars of the trade meet, but it seems I'll have to investigate for myself. If I remember correctly, there is a restaurant in the Jin capital that belonged to the Foam clan. I'll first take a look there and save myself the risk of being noticed by someone perceptive at an inn. After Han Li muttered those words, he stepped off the mountain and directly made his way to the huge city in the distance. Although the Jin capital was said to be unrivaled in majesty and was incomparable in scope by mortals and low-grade cultivators, in Han Li's eyes, it was actually a few grades inferior compared to the Scattered Star Sea's Heavenly Star City, the greatest city he had seen in his lifetime. However, the Jin capital did have a few aspects that were unique. Apart from the outermost wall of the city, there were 15-meter-tall 6-layered walls constructed every half-kilometer interval away from the city. It was a miraculous feat for this to be constructed through the sole might of mortals. In addition to the many walls of the capital, the city was divided into 13 large districts. The northmost section was the imperial city, taking up about 20 kilometers of land. The other districts were just as large, but they were densely filled with buildings and roads. To walk past 2 districts from the city gates, he had to spend nearly half a day. Han Li felt quite gloomy as he was unaccustomed to traveling for long periods of time at such a slow speed. Eventually, Han Li found himself standing in front of a 2-story restaurant. He calmly looked at it for a moment with both hands behind his back before walking in. The restaurant was doing quite well for itself, as seen from its mostly filled seats. Han Li casually swept his gaze past the first floor before making his way to the counter. A thin middle-aged man who appeared to be the shopkeeper was standing behind it. When Han Li arrived in front of him, he didn't bother to say anything. He simply swept his sleeve and placed a jade pendant on the counter. It was inscribed with the words Feng of Ning. When the shopkeeper saw the pendant, his expression changed and he took a quick look at Han Li before calmly taking it into his hand and carefully examining it. Soon, he put the pendant away and whispered, "Follow me." The shopkeeper turned around, paying no notice of any other customers, and walked through the side door. Han Li followed after him. The shopkeeper led him into a secluded building and then he offered the pendant back to Han Li with both his hands, respectfully saying, "So it was the young master who has arrived. This servant Feng Quan pays his respects." It appeared he had mistaken him for the deceased Feng Yu. "Help me find a residence where no one will trouble me," Han Li coldly commanded. "It can't be the restaurant. It'll be best to find a place that has no one else nearby, and you should also keep this matter to yourself. Don't tell anyone else." "Yes. I will find an appropriate residence for the young master. Please rest here, I'll be back in half a day." The shopkeeper spoke without hesitation. Han Li nodded. "Good, go quickly." Shopkeeper Feng left the room and carefully shut the door, then hurrying on his way. Now alone, Han Li casually pulled a chair to the side and sat down before sinking into meditation. Time slowly passed by, and Han Li's face stirred as he opened his eyes. Footsteps could be heard from outside the door. Then, shopkeeper Feng excitedly walked in. "Young master, I found a suitable place. The master of the residence is an old friend of mine and his family is out traveling. The building is entirely empty and he will not return for 2 years. I've made arrangements and you may immediately move in." "Yes, that sounds good. Lead the way." "I am honored, young master. Please follow me." Shopkeeper Feng walked out from the room with Han Li closely following after him. They left the restaurant from the rear entrance where a 2-wheel cart was waiting for them. A hunchbacked old man was sitting at the front. Han Li narrowed his eyes when he saw the white-haired coachman and said, "You are quite accommodating to have prepared a cart. But didn't I say to keep this matter quiet? What's going on with this person?" "Young master, this is old man Wu," shopkeeper Feng respectfully replied. "He is quite sensible, but he can hardly hear anything, so there is no fear of him spreading rumors. And since the residence I mentioned is far away, it would be better to take a horse." "So it was like that. That's fine." Han Li frowned and pondered for a moment before climbing on the cart. Shopkeeper Feng also climbed on and the old coachman shook the horse's reins without the need for any orders. They then slowly set off. Han Li sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. As for shopkeeper Feng, he sat in the corner of the cart and kept silent with a lowered head. They passed through many different roads and changed direction to head to another district. 2 hours later, the cart stopped at a remote courtyard. There were no other residences, causing the region to appear quite desolate. Han Li and shopkeeper Feng then descended from the cart. With a smile, the shopkeeper led the way and pushed open the gate. "This is it, young master. I will go in first and tidy up one of the rooms for you." But at that moment, Han Li suddenly said, "You plan on heading in first to escape the restriction and then have the 3 inside capture me?" Shopkeeper Feng was greatly alarmed and without another thought, he pushed open the gate and was about to run inside, but a strange red thread suddenly made an appearance behind his head. Then, His body was set aflame and instantly turned to ash. When the hunchbacked old man on the cart saw this, he shouted, "Attack!" With a wave of his hand, the old man launched a green flying saber towards Han Li. At that same moment, a yellow mist suddenly filled the empty courtyard, and a black pitchfork and 2 scarlet halberds shot towards Han Li. Han Li sneered at the sight and waved his sleeve, releasing an azure mist. The saber flew into the mist only to be captured and drawn into his sleeve. As for the other 3 magic tools flying towards them, he casually waved his arm at them and another mist of light appeared from his hand, capturing them all at lightning speed. In a single moment, all of their weapons were completely restricted. Loud frightened shouts came out from the yellow mist and the old man's complexion turned pale. They all realized what Han Li's vast display of strength had signified. Without another thought, the old man released a faint red talisman from his hand and bit down on his tongue to release blood essence onto it, dissolving into a cloud of sanguine around the old man before flying over 30 meters away in the blink of an eye. The cultivators in the mist weren't slow to react either. 3 streaks of varying colored light flew out and scattered in different directions. Chapter 938. The 3 Corpses. Han Li's expression sank when he saw their attempt to escape, and proceeded to flick his fingers at the 3 cultivators who had emerged from the yellow mist. They were only able to fly 10 meters away before being engulfed by sword chi. Miserable screams sounded out, followed by a shower of blood raining from the air. Terrified, the hunchbacked old man that escaped in the blood cloud immediately poured the entirety of his spiritual power into the cloud, hoping to reach the street 100 meters away. He didn't actually think he would be able to escape, but if he managed to escape in an area filled with morals and cause Han Li to hesitate, buying him precious time. However, Han Li simply stood in place with a sneer and pointed at the blood cloud. The red thread that had just killed shopkeeper Feng a moment ago suddenly appeared behind the cloud and pierced through it in a flash of crimson light. An anguished wail sounded out and the blood cloud scattered. The hunchbacked old man then fell from the sky and was caught by a large hand of azure light. It had thrown away the 3 magic tools previously in its grasp, bringing only the old man back to Han Li. As for the red thread, it completely disappeared without a trace before making a reappearance at his side. Han Li held out his hand and the thread slowly fell into his palm to reveal its true form as an inch-long flying needle. It was translucent and crystalline with red light pulsing from its surface. He looked at the needle with a satisfied expression. Quite a bit of effort went in to refine the crystallized demon core into this flying needle. Its great might, speed, and stealth were all to his satisfaction. And with a bit more tempering, he could increase its power by another stage. With a flip of his hand, the needle was absorbed into his body. Emotionlessly, he raised his head to look at the hunchbacked old man grasped in the hand of light. The old man's complexion had now turned completely pale in part due to the new hole in his abdomen. When he saw Han Li looking at him, the old man forced a smile out of fear and spoke with a flattering tone. "This is a misunderstanding, a complete misunderstanding. Since Senior possesses such vast abilities, we certainly found the wrong person. Yes, Senior must certainly be a magnanimous person and mustn't lower himself to this foolish junior's level. I am a mere member of the Guanning's Kong clan. Please, if you have any questions, I will be sure to answer them all." Knowing that his situation was dire, he hastily rambled in hope of somehow persuading Han Li to spare him. However, Han Li stuck a talisman onto the old man's body and he suddenly ceased begging for his life as his eyes became spiritless. "So troublesome, I only wish to know a few things so I didn't have to worry," he muttered softly and then summoned all of the magic tools on the ground into his hand before heading inside the courtyard, followed by the large azure hand tightly grabbing the old man. The courtyard had a very simple smokescreen restriction placed down inside of it. Han Li paid it no regard and with a wave of his hand, he struck it with magic seals and shattered it. Afterwards, he brought the old man into one of the rooms. After the time it took to finish a meal, Han Li struck the old man and turned him to ash, having him pass away from the world while he was unconscious. Then, he sat down in a wooden chair and began to mull over his thoughts as he held his chin in hand. Without having to worry about preserving the soul, he used the dream tear technique to scour everything the old man knew. He was a Foundation establishment attendant of the Kong clan that was in charge of their affairs in the Jin capital. This person was actually quite competent. He was able to find shopkeeper Feng 2 years ago and threatened him into paying allegiance to the Kong clan. After all, how could a mortal dare to oppose a cultivator? When Han Li used Feng Yu's jade pendant to contact shopkeeper Feng, he had informed the Kong clan members in turn, hoping to acquire merit with them. As a result, the old man rejoiced at the appearance of the long-lost young master of the Feng clan and didn't dare to release this opportunity. He set up a trap and personally set off to deliver the supposed Feng Yu to an ambush. But when Han Li left the restaurant, he was able to see through the old man's poor concealment techniques at a glance and asked shopkeeper Feng a knowing question. Unfortunately, there were too many mortals nearby and he couldn't directly take action. As such, he decided to follow them and later investigate the matter. Eventually, he was led into an ambush of Foundation establishment cultivators, each of them posing as much of a threat to him as an ant. He had an idea this was going to happen. Even if core formation cultivators laid in ambush for him, it would still prove to be a laughable matter. As Han Li scoured through the old man's soul, he made an astonishing discovery. After the 3 noble clans of Guanning concluded their joint trade fair, it was discovered that the Kong clan ancestor had his soul devoured and that his corpse was possessed by a devil. As a result, the other 2 clans joined together to request assistance from the sects backing them, leading to the possessed ancestor being struck down. With this, the Kong clan suffered a massive drop in strength, turning from the strongest to the weakest clan in the region. This had also foiled the plan of King Glorious Blaze, who was hidden deep into the Snowmound mountain range. Furious, he directly raised his tomb and released several thousands of Foundation establishment-grade undead soldiers, brazenly forming an underworld ghost formation to destroy all human life in the mountains. The high-grade cultivators backing the 3 clans had a massive battle against the 3 corpses of the ancient tomb. Many of the refined corpses and low-grade disciples had perished, with the disciples' souls consumed by the ghost formation. As for the nascent soul-grade cultivators, they found themselves at a massive disadvantage as they fought against the tomb's 3 corpses inside of the underworld ghost formation, with one of these cultivators even suffering heavy injuries out of negligence. After the battle, cultivators of the 3 clans were trapped on the mountain where the grand auction had been held by the ghost formation, which spanned 50 kilometers around them. They could only rely on the grand formations that were previously established on the mountain to survive with much difficulty. In truth, these nascent soul cultivators had heavily injured King Glorious Blaze in their ambush and had underestimated him as a result. They had believed that since he had been crippled, he should have been easy to deal with. But they hadn't known that King Glorious Blaze had the strength equivalent to a late nascent soul cultivator with the support of his tomb, and with the addition to 2 other early nascent soul grade corpses, the mortal cultivators became completely overwhelmed in terms of might. Had things continued, the cultivators would have been wiped out, but such bold movements over the span of the month had eventually alerted a late nascent soul cultivator of a nearby Daoist sect. In a display of amazing strength, this eccentric scared the 3 corpses back into the depths of the Snowmound Mountains. The late nascent soul cultivator showed no intention of pursuing the corpses after forcing them to retreat. And after the 3 clans were rescued, they didn't dare to remain in the vicinity and withdrew from the mountain range, giving the corpse monarch free reign over the land and an opportunity for him to rise again with greater strength. However, King Glorious Blaze and the other 2 corpses were also fearful towards the late nascent soul cultivator and didn't dare to rashly emerge from the depths of the mountain. Naturally, Han Li understood the old man only knew a portion of the truth, but he was able to draw a connection with the heavily injured King Glorious Blaze he had seen. After coming up with his own conclusions, he couldn't help but click his tongue in astonishment. This King Glorious Blaze was a rather fearsome character. He was already heavily injured when he fought against Master Wildzand, but only needed a short while to recover before raising a large-scale assault against the nearby cultivators. But as someone who consumed countless medicines, Han Li clearly knew that it was impossible to fully recover one's vitality from such grave injuries so quickly no matter what medicine they took. Han Li had yet to fully recover his peak cultivation, for example, despite the number of medicines at his disposal. As such, the only possibility of King Glorious Blaze's sudden recovery in strength was that his techniques as a myriad-year corpse monarch were immensely powerful to begin with, or his techniques had a unique property allowing for a miraculous recovery. As Han Li pondered about the abilities of the corpse monarch, he recalled the heavenly corpse pearl he set aside within his body. He drew much support from the pearl's powerful effects to cultivate the bright jade arts. He was even unsure whether he would have been able to cultivate the technique to the second layer solely with the Vajra relic. The effectiveness of the pearl was perhaps the reason why King Glorious Blaze was able to recover his strength at miraculous speed. Han Li calmly pondered the matter for a moment more before tossing it to the back of his mind, setting his thoughts on making future plans in the Jin capital. Needless to say, he wouldn't be able to stay at this courtyard for long. Someone would likely come to investigate the disappearance of shopkeeper Feng, which would be quite troublesome. It would be better for him to rent a room at a monastery or temple for a time, as it would be much quieter than an inn. Additionally, he would need to pay a visit to the cultivator markets in the Jin capital to investigate the details of the upcoming great auction. Having made certain of his plans, he departed from the residence, leaving no trace of him behind. Chapter 939, Hidden Fortune Pavilion. After some time, Han Li found a small, unremarkable monastery inside the city. The Daoist priest at the monastery was a mortal that completely lacked magic power. Han Li was quite satisfied with the location and gave some silver as alms to the priest, having decided to reside there for the time being. Following the arrival of the next morning, he left the monastery and discovered an academy with the presence of a cultivator. Since the academy opened in the Jin capital, it couldn't be considered to be small and was certain to have some backing. It was likely associated with a Confucian sect. However, Han Li didn't seem to care about this. After he snuck inside, he approached an elderly Confucian scholar and released the immense aura of his nascent soul stage cultivation. When the old scholar sensed this, he felt the entirety of the magic power in his body freeze. Realizing Han Li's vast cultivation, he took a half step forward with a calm expression and saluted him. "Your presence honors the academy, senior. Is there anything I may help you with?" Han Li smiled and leisurely said, "You are quite tactful. I've sought you out for a few minor matters. Could you tell me about the markets in the Jin capital and a few things about the upcoming auction? You should know quite a bit considering you're a native cultivator." When the old scholar heard this, he promptly replied, "The location of the markets won't be a problem. I will immediately make a map for you. However, I don't know much about the auction. Is there anything specific senior would like to know?" As he spoke, he took out a white jade slip from his storage pouch and began to inscribe the locations of the nearby markets onto it. Han Li's smile faded away and he calmly said, "I'd like to know about the date and location of the auction as well as any particularly rare materials that will appear." With a sincere tone, the old scholar answered, "The time and place won't be a problem. In 9 days, the auction will take place in the Western Market's Treasureshine Pavilion. There will be 2 separate auctions for core formation and nascent soul cultivators held at different times. While nascent soul stage cultivators may participate in the core formation grade auction, core formation cultivators may not do the same. But, I'm afraid I cannot answer what materials will be up for bid. The auction is far too great in scope as it is being hosted by many great clans. How could an outsider know what will be up for bid? But according to past auctions, there should be over 100 incredibly rare items. Additionally, a few seniors may also put up a few of their own rare items up for bid, extending the duration of the auction for up to a week." Han Li lowered his head and muttered, "So it was like that. The Treasureshine Pavilion. Senior, I've already finished making the jade slip. Please take care of it." The old scholar then offered the jade slip with both hands. Han Li took it without another word and gave a cursory sweep of it with his spiritual sense before nodding with satisfaction. "Very good. And you'd better keep quiet about seeing me. Otherwise," after letting out a sinister chuckle, Han Li glowed with azure light before suddenly disappearing without a trace. The old scholar widened his eyes and fell into the chair as he sank into deep contemplation. After a long while, he swept his spiritual sense past the room and discovered that there was no one else there. He then let out a long sigh and wryly smiled. After Han Li left the academy, he looked through the white jade slip and made his way to the West Jin market. This market was located in a remote street in the western portion of the Jin capital and was hidden by a superior concealment spell formation. When Han Li arrived at the entrance, He easily walked through the hidden restrictions and arrived at a desolate street. Of course, it was only perceived as a desolate street by mortals. As for Han Li, he saw several hundreds of cultivators at the very least that were enter and leaving a few stores on the street. Han Li didn't sweep his spiritual sense through the street. As the auction was close at hand, there were certain to be nascent soul-stage cultivators overseeing the market. Organizing such a large auction wasn't something that wasn't a laid-back affair after all. With that in mind, he slowly walked down the street and swept his gaze to either side. The West Jin market was clearly different from what he saw in the southern portion of the Jin capital. The buildings inside consisted of 2 or 3 stories, as if in a display of wealth. It seems like all the powerful businesses of the great Jin cultivation world established a storefront in the capital to display themselves. In that case, Han Li had no need to carefully choose which ones to browse. He promptly brought out a list of materials and began to ask about them at each of the stores. Of course, all the materials that he had yet to acquire were all incredibly rare. In fact, Han Li didn't have high hopes of easily finding Theses materials and was only doing this in passing. He actually had different business to attend to in the market. Participating in the auction would certainly take up a large number of spirit stones. While Han Li originally possessed a great number of spirit stones, after he purchased a good number of materials as the masked cultivator, he had spent away most of them. Now that a large-scale auction appeared before him, he found himself short on spirit stones. Han Li had planned on finding a large shop to sell a few rare materials for spirit stones, as he would receive the most spirit stones from a wealthy store. At that moment, he arrived in front of a 3-story building and narrowed his eyes. The store was clearly much larger than its neighbors, and it was receiving quite a few visitors. Han Li then caught sight of the large sign that hung on its gates, writing the words Hidden Fortune Pavilion in large golden characters. It was the store that was known for its hidden fortunate rooms. 1. He hesitated for a moment before walking inside. The first floor of the building was quite spacious and was over 100 meters wide. There were 60 handsome qi condensation servants that were welcoming guests and introducing a few of their wares to potential customers. When Han Li entered, a young servant walked up to him with a smile and was about to greet him. But then, a white-robed middle-aged man sitting at a corner of the room had taken notice of Han Li's cultivation. He immediately placed down the cup of tea he was drinking and hastily shouted, "Step down, I will be taking care of this senior." Afterwards, the middle-aged man tidied his clothes and saluted Han Li, respectfully saying, "We are honored to have senior at our Hidden Fortune Pavilion. Since the first floor won't have anything that will interest you, would you like to follow me to the 3rd floor? Han Li's gaze flickered and he answered, "Yes, I came here to look for someone in charge in the first place." Then, he calmly followed the middle-aged man upstairs. When the customers on the 1st floor saw this, they raised an uproar, realizing Han Li was a nascent soul cultivator. "This is the first time I've seen a nascent soul stage senior, but why does he look so young? TCH, looks like the Hidden Fortunate Pavilion is getting some big business." Shouts of praise and surprise continued to sound out below. The 3rd floor of the pavilion was small, but it was quite elegantly arranged and had 2 beautiful female cultivators waiting. When they saw the middle-aged man bringing up a guest, they immediately prepared a pot of tea. The middle-aged man waited for Han Li to sit down and waved his hand at the table with a smile. "Senior, please have a taste. This is the Mist Rain Spirit Tea that our pavilion had acquired at a steep price. It had quite a unique flavor." Han Li ignored the tea and swept his sleeve past the table, placing a green jade slip on top of it. He calmly said, "There is no rush to taste the tea. Let's first see if you have any of the materials I wish to purchase. To tell the truth, I've already been to many stores and I wasn't able to find anything that I wanted. I'm not particularly hopeful that your Hidden Fortune Pavilion will have any of them either. Since Senior is in a hurry, I'll go ahead and have a look. Since you weren't able to find them elsewhere, they must be quite rare." The middle-aged man smiled and summoned the jade slip into his hand before he immersed his spiritual sense into it. Soon, his expression had changed with surprise, but Han Li's expression had remained unchanged. He had seen this reaction several times already when he showed the list to the other store owners. He wanted materials that were rarely ever seen in this world and were rarely heard of as well. The middle-aged man withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip and wryly smiled. It is no wonder that Xianxia wasn't able to find these materials from the previous stores. They are beyond the grasp of ordinary stores. As for our pavilion, we only have a small Thunder Spirit crystal. Having expected more disappointment, Han Li wore an expression of delight when he heard this and said, "You have a Thunder Spirit crystal." The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment and then explained, "That's right. Xianxia has come at a fortunate time. Our pavilion had just acquired the Thunder Spirit crystal, but there will be a bit of trouble as it doesn't belong to us. Rather, a nascent soul cultivator with good relations to our pavilion has placed it in our care to exchange it for other materials. If the crystal isn't exchanged for other materials, it will be put up in the coming auction." 1. Magic tools that are capable of expanding in size to create mansions and rooms. They're also capable of having spell formations placed inside of them. Chapter 940, Hidden Fortune Mansions. When Han Li heard about the conditions to acquire the Thunder Spirit crystal, he rubbed his chin and asked, "An exchange? I actually have a few materials on hand that could be traded for it." When the white-robed middle-aged man heard Han Li, he handed over a jade slip that was previously prepared. "The materials and medicine pills that the crystal's owner wants in exchange are in here. Although it might be more common than some of the materials that Xianxia wishes to collect, it's still difficult to find in this world. Otherwise, the Thunder Spirit crystal would have already been exchanged as it's an ideal material for creating lightning attribute magic treasures." Han Li took the jade slip and immersed his spiritual sense into it without another thought. The middle-aged man carefully examined Han Li's expression, hoping to see through some of his thoughts, but his expression hadn't betrayed the slightest change or emotion. Rather, his calm demeanor disappointed the shopkeeper and even caused him to feel apprehensive. Just where did this Xianxia Han come from? Not only is his appearance young, but the materials he's looking for are incredibly rare. Although there are many nascent soul cultivators with young appearances, most of them are female, and this man doesn't particularly appear to care about his clothes and appearance. Could he be a newly ascended nascent soul cultivator? Although the middle-aged shopkeeper could sense that Han Li was a nascent soul cultivator, he wasn't able to determine his precise cultivation. He could only determine that his presence was stronger than that of other early nascent soul cultivators he met before. As a result, he was attending to Han Li personally with great care. With the powers backing the Hidden Fortune Pavilion, he didn't need to treat ordinary nascent soul cultivators with excessive effort. A moment later, Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip and handed it back over. He then said, "I do have a few items that this fellow Daoist needs. However, I'll need to see the Thunder Spirit crystal before making the exchange. If the quality of the crystal is too lacking, I will not trade for it." With some thought, the shopkeeper smiled and said, "Of course, so how about this? Since this is a high-value trade, I will send a sound transmission talisman to Xianxia Fu, the owner of the Thunder Spirit crystal, and you will be able to conduct the trade in person. He is currently residing nearby this market." After pondering a bit as well, Han Li said, "All right, I also wish to meet this fellow Daoist Fu. The more of these crystals I can acquire, the better. I also want to see whether he has more on hand." He thought that since this old man Fu was able to acquire such a rare material, it was possible that he had other of these materials on hand. "In that case, I will go and send the message. Please wait for a moment. Xianxia Han. Xianxia Fu will arrive soon." The shopkeeper gave a salute and promptly left. Then, Han Li finally decided to turn his attention to the tea on the table. He took a sip and found that its taste was quite unordinary. Soon, the shopkeeper returned. Han Li then turned his attention to him and asked, "Does your store produce hidden fortune rooms in abundance? I've heard that your pavilion creates high-grade hidden fortune rooms, allowing one to carry miniaturized cave residences on one's palm, and that these rooms are attached with a few formidable restrictions. Is this true?" The shopkeeper chuckled and explained, "Hidden fortune rooms are indeed our specialty, but what Xianxia had described are the highest-grade hidden fortune rooms known as hidden fortune mansions. Since these mansions are refined from uncommon materials, few of them are ever produced. We have some in storage that aren't being sold, and all those we put on sale are all gone." Surprised by what he heard, Han Li asked, "Why aren't they being sold? Didn't your pavilion refine them for that purpose?" The middle-aged man explained with a trace of embarrassment, "I won't conceal this from Xianxia. The remaining hidden fortune mansions are of unrivaled quality. Be it their size or attached restrictions, they far exceed the ones that we had put for sale. As such, it was decided that they would be retained for the purpose of being traded for rare materials." With great interest, Han Li curled his lip and said, "That is quite surprising. If these hidden fortune mansions are as marvelous as you say, I might want to purchase one. Could you take them out and let me have a look?" With roused spirits, the shopkeeper hastily said, "Take them out? Xianxia must be joking. I am only a mere steward of this store, and I do not have the authority to use the treasure. It may only be taken out with Elder Wang's permission. Furthermore, we only keep one of them here at our main branch, and it is our pavilion's pride. The other mansions are located at our other branches. However, this hidden fortune mansion was personally created by our tool refinement grandmaster Xianxia and should be ranked amongst the very best of its kind. Solely based on the restrictions attached to it, it is equivalent to a high-grade ancient treasure. If Xianxia is truly interested, I can immediately lead you to a hidden room and Senior Han can continue the discussion with Elder Wang there. The materials needed to exchange for the room are also something that only he will know." From Han Li's bold tone, it appeared that he was truly interested. If this deal went through, then the shopkeeper's position in the hidden fortune pavilion would sharply rise. "So it's like that, but I'll have," just as Han Li spoke, his expression made a sudden change. The shopkeeper was shocked and hadn't realized what was going on. An old man's voice bellowed from below, "Youngster Zhao, is there truly someone that wishes to make a trade? I was in a crucial moment of my cultivation and cut it short to rush over here." Although his voice was aged, it was very clear and contained strength. Heavy thumping footsteps followed after he spoke. The shopkeeper hastily stood up and respectfully replied, "It is true, of course. I wouldn't dare to deceive you." A blur appeared at the third floor to reveal a towering and bulky silhouette. Han Li narrowed his eyes and looked at who had just arrived. He was a large black-robed old man with dark red skin. The astonishing spiritual qi fluctuations from his body revealed him to be a cultivator at the peak of mid-nascent soul stage. Han Li unconsciously frowned in surprise. When the red-faced old man heard the shopkeeper, he turned to look at Han Li with a trace of astonishment, noticing both cultivation and young appearance. He then walked forward with wide steps and heartily laughed. "So this must be the fellow Daoist Han that you mentioned. Since he possessed something I wanted, he can't be an ordinary cultivator." Han Li stood up and saluted him with a smile. "Not at all. Fellow Daoist Fu's cultivation has me in admiration of him. What is there to admire? I've only managed this far with age." The two cultivators then took a seat across from each other and Old Man Fu eagerly said, "I'll get to the point. Could you tell me the items that you have for me?" Han Li smiled and calmly said, "A scarlet essence mushroom. It is over 1,000 years of maturity." This wasn't the same 3,000-year mushroom he traded for in the heavenly south. He had used one of its spores to nurture a new mushroom to 1,000 years of maturity. A scarlet essence mushroom. Old Man Fu's expression lit up. "If it is truly 1,000 years old, then I will exchange it for my Thunder Spirit crystal. Can fellow Daoist let me take a look?" "Of course. I'll take it out right now, but can you let me look at the crystal as well?" "Ah, I've been too eager. Of course you can." Old Man Fu turned to the shopkeeper and commanded, "Shopkeeper Zhao, take out the crystal for fellow Daoist Han." "Yes, Senior." The shopkeeper acknowledged the order and left the hall. The red-faced old man examined Han Li and curiously asked, "Fellow Daoist Han, your appearance is quite unfamiliar, but your cultivation has already reached mid-nascent soul stage. Where have you come from? Have you always remained in bitter cultivation and rarely made contact with other cultivators? Why else would I have no impression of you despite your impressive spiritual power?" Han Li smiled in response to the old man's curiosity and replied with a prepared answer, "It is no surprise you wouldn't know of me. I've cultivated on a small island overseas. I rarely set foot on the great Jin mainland. Old Man Fu paused in surprise and understandingly said, "So you were an overseas cultivator. I truly respect you. I've long heard of overseas cultivators possessing many wondrous abilities, and that they cultivate a school of techniques different from cultivators of the mainland. I hope to exchange cultivation experiences with you. However, it appears fellow Daoist has traveled a very long distance to the Jin capital for the auction that will soon take place." As there were countless lands beyond the seas, it was no surprise that there were nascent soul cultivators who weren't well known. The old man had mostly accepted it as truth. After they chatted for a moment more, footsteps came from outside the hall and a bright voice said, "Why haven't I been informed of Brother Fu's arrival at our Hidden Fortune Pavilion? And we have our guest fellow Daoist Han as well. I should have been there to personally welcome you." With that, a pale silver-robed cultivator entered the hall.